Well, let's discuss this further with our political commentator, Lee Harris. As you heard there, he doesn't want to... John Redwood did not want to discuss this, Lee, but I think an awful lot of people do want to discuss this. And, I think Boris is already making it quite clear that he's going to come out fighting on Wednesday, isn't he? The front page of The Guardian today says a defiant Boris Johnson is preparing an extraordinary defence of his actions. And allies of his are already saying that the parliamentary inquiry into the affair is relying on weak evidence compiled by a former civil servant now recruited by the Labour Party, referring to Sue Gray, of course. What do you think is going to happen on Wednesday? Is he guilty? Is he innocent? Is he being stitched up? And we're going to have fireworks, aren't we?
Absolutely, yeah. Wednesday's going to be, a 4-hour-long televised showdown hearing on whether Boris knowingly misled Parliament about Partygate. It's a huge moment that could have serious ramifications for Boris Johnson's future. So, of course, it's very important. If he's found to have misled Parliament, there'll be a free vote. And if he gets something like a 10-day suspension, as I understand it, he could face a by-election in his constituency. So it is a big deal. But you're right to say it's going to be explosive. As you've already said, he's expected to produce a 50-page dossier to the Cross-Party Privilege Committee that provides apparently quite conclusive evidence that his advisors and senior members of staff in Number 10 all believe the gatherings were within the rules, which basically destroys the argument that Boris must have known that this was not in the rules. But, so far in Boris's defence, this has been an 11-month investigation. And according to Boris's team, and I'm pretty sure we would all know about it if it was the case, not a single shred of evidence has been presented that shows he knowingly misled Parliament. I think it's going to be explosive, and it's going to be, I can give you my view on it. My view is that actually, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, for that matter, shouldn't have got FPNs in the first place. At the time, I thought the whole thing was ridiculous. I know that a lot of the public thought it was ridiculous too, although I can understand why they were outraged at the time in as much as that it wasn't a great look. But as more evidence and as time has gone on, I think that this is starting to look a little bit like a show trial. It's a bit of a stitch up in my view. The Privilege Committee is being chaired by Harriet Harman, who openly dislikes Boris. If you look at her previous tweets, she's already made up her mind that she's guilty. Sue Gray, who investigated Partygate, is now Keir Starmer's chief of staff. It's irrespective of your views on Boris. The process, in my view, is clearly unfair. It does look like a bit of a witch hunt, and the parliamentary appears to be relying on weak evidence compiled by a former civil servant who's now been recruited by the Labour Party. The optics are terrible. And actually, you could argue it's frankly a bit of an embarrassment to this country that it's even happening. Priti Patel was right to say that this puts our democracy in a very, very bad light. This hearing would frankly not be acceptable outside of Parliament. It's clearly unsatisfactory to have a judge of the process say Boris is guilty before even seeing the evidence. But yeah, a lot of people want to bring down Boris, and those are clearly the Tory wets.
What do you think we're going to see? What sort of Boris are we going to see? Because the man is a bit of a chameleon, isn't he? I mean, is he going to be statesman-like, or are we going to get the bumbling Boris that we very often get, trying to sort of get round the committee? What do you expect from him in terms of his performance on Wednesday?
I think we'll probably see a mixture of the two, because Boris knows that the kind of bumbling side of Boris that's partly why he's popular. But I think we will see a statesman-like approach. He's going to be there with his lawyer, who will be going through, like I say, this big dossier of evidence. So I think he's going to be approaching this quite seriously, and he knows himself how important this is to his own career. So yeah, I think we're going to see Boris come out and deal with this in a professional, grown-up way. But I actually hope we see a bit of bumbling Boris, because that's why we love him.
Yeah, and he does seem still to have a huge following in certain sections of the community, in spite of the fact that at the time it did appear that Boris was sort of saying, well, there's one rule for all of you and one rule for Number 10. He's never lost that appeal, has he?
No, Boris is always. It would say always. Boris is popular because people see him, and I'm basing this on focus groups that we've seen during the election where Boris became prime minister. People will quite rightly mention his hair and say that he was a bit of a bumbling fool, but that's something that they could relate to. People are fed up of politicians with pre-scripted answers, all saying the same thing, all following the same line. And whether you like Boris or not, he certainly did have that impression about him that he was a bit of a rebel, and I think people like that. But the people on his side in this procedure are the right of the party, probably the majority of the ERG. I would say a large proportion of the Tory membership, especially those who voted for Boris to be Prime Minister in the first place. But in my view, I think people supporting Boris will have a strong sense of fairness and democracy, whether they like him or not.
What happens on Wednesday, Lee? Thank you very much indeed for that. Political commentator Lee Harris there.